We're going to go ahead and bring Akshaya up on stage, who has been with us on many a community call. We said that we're very excited about this next demo that we're doing because it really is what we've been calling internally our Magic DX. If you were looking at branch names inside different repositories, you would have seen that as well. Uh, what this does is drastically streamlines the actual commands that have to be run and kind of that daily workflow and cycle that you'll be doing as an engineer using Hasura DDN. So Akshaya, go ahead and join me on stage.
So for those of you who've been following along, you might have seen commands like this as you use the CLI, and perhaps you are wondering what this is all about. Like this is quite complex. So we had a bunch of steps. We had a bunch of flags for each step, and a lot of people rightly asked, "Hey, what's with this? Could you not make it simpler? Like we're used to running an npm install or Docker Compose up. What's with these commands?" Um, so I'm here today to tell you about some of the work we've been doing on that. And so let's add some magic to that. And what we went back and did is look at the flags, gave a lot of them a good default values, added an interactive mode to some of the commands, and built some more commands that sort of compose multiple primitive CLI commands together. And that got us to a CLI experience that looks completely different. So quick recap, to set up an API, you might have a data source, which is your Postgres database, Mongo database. You have a connector, which helps you configure how your engine is going to talk to that database. And then there's the engine itself, which is the GraphQL engine that serves the GraphQL API. And you can have different connectors. For example, the Python connector we saw earlier, our TypeScript connector may not have a data source behind it. But then you just configure that connector with Python functions or TypeScript functions. And then you could actually get the engine to build an API off of that. So how do we set all of this up, and what do the CLI commands look like? So the first thing we're going to do is log in on the CLI. The second thing we're going to do is scaffold our supergraph metadata. So that's going to set up the metadata for the engine. Then we're going to come back and add the scaffolding for the connector, which is going to walk us through which connector we're going to use and some of the configuration. And we're going to actually see a demo of this, but I just want to express the model and then we'll do it again. Immediately after that, we want to configure our connector, which might look like setting up some environment variables or writing some Python functions. Then after that, we want to configure our engine metadata, which is basically telling it how to take the entities in that connector and bring them forward to the GraphQL API, which are things like models, commands, and relationships. Then we can go ahead and build that metadata. And then we can bring all of this up using Docker. So our connector configuration runs as a connector container, a Docker container, and the supergraph metadata runs as an engine Docker container. Yeah, that's pretty much the exact CLI commands that you're going to write out to get a local GraphQL API running. And then, of course, you can go ahead and create a project on DDN. And then you would go ahead and create a build of your API on the DDN. So the cool thing over here is these are literally the commands that you're going to be running. And we're going to go through them again in some detail. So let me just switch to my terminal so we can do that. All right. Okay.
Akshay, would you mind
Would you
blowing up
mind pulling
the
up the
font size just a little bit, please?
is that
Perfect.
good? Okay. So let me start with team 1 or team A. So I'm going to say, and then I'm going to run through these commands. So the first thing I'm going to do is scaffold my, a moment, please. All right. I'm going to scaffold my metadata. So I'm just going to show you empty folder. Okay. And if at any point in time I'm sort of lost, I have a hint that's going to tell me what command I can run next. Let me just go into VS Code so we can follow along with what's happening. So team one, this is one repository, let's say, and that scaffold command has already set up my first subgraph. It set up the compose file, everything I sort of need to get going. The next thing I want to do is add a connector. So -I sort of puts it into interactive mode. So it's me to choose from a list. I'm going to go with Postgres. All right, continue with the defaults. There's a default demo Postgres database available, but at this point, you could also drop in your own database URL. And that's it. I'm going to type in the next command from the hint. To run that, let's just skip back to VS Code. Here's that connector we just added. So that's been scaffolded for us. That means we make a Git repository. What this is doing is it's going to go and talk to Postgres. It's going to pull the schema from our Postgres database. And then it's also going to go and inform the engine what this schema looks like. All right, so let's look at a quick diff. And you can see that the connector configuration has been updated, which is the schema from the database itself. And our engine metadata has also been updated with a copy of the same schema. And let me just quickly jump back. So far we've introspected the connector. And now we can go and add our models, commands, and relationships. So that's the name of the connector and a glob pattern matching the collections that we want to add. Similarly for commands and relationships, there are no commands on this connector. Let me add all the relationships. All right. And now we've generated all the metadata we need to set up our API. Let's go ahead and build this metadata. That's done as well. And at this point, I'm going to start up the Docker Compose containers that's going to serve this API. So I'm just going to copy that from our hint and bring up the Docker containers. All right, that's weird.
Always the joys of Docker, right?
Not sure why that happened actually. Um, hmm.
So
All
actually,
right,
one
if
thing I
any,
will say, just because it's like such a quick process of doing all of this, would you like me to try sharing screen and running through? See if we can do a speed run and get it up?
sure, yes, please.
All right.
Uh, this incidentally is the exact same as what we have on our quick start page. So for anyone following along, you can sort of go through these command by command, and the explanations are right there. Rob, over to you. I will see if I can debug this.
All right, so I'm in an empty directory inside of VS Code, right? I got my terminal open down at the bottom. I'm just going to go ahead and start off with DDN, supergraph, and knit, and we'll put it in the current directory. As Akshay has said, right, we're going to go ahead and follow the hints. So I'll go ahead and initialize my connector just as we did before. And we'll do Postgres, and I'll call it my PG. Take the port, sample app, all these values. That's fine by me. I think you got to the introspection bit, right? So now we should see Docker spinning up in the background, hopefully. And if we look inside of our app subdirectory, we'll look inside of metadata, and we at least have our my PG in there. And now we can start adding our resources. So I haven't done this except for once, actually. So there's now 3 commands here that I would use. I can do models, commands, and relationships, right? So I would do DDN model. Do I have to name the connector here?
Yeah. So
Okay.
you'd say in
My
model add
PG. Okay.
job pattern.
Okay.
Rob, real quick, one question from the audience. Do you mind zooming in on the terminal a little bit so it's easier to read?
Is that a little better for us? Hopefully so.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We know there's no commands in here, so I'm going to come through and I'll do relationship. Whoops. All right. And just as we noticed real quick, I want to point out, right? So we had all this output of the console, but we had this directory open as well. So Akshaya, can you tell us a little bit about like these individual named files that we had that are being generated right here?
Sure. So this is the engine metadata. This is configuring the engine to serve the API. And each file, so the way the CLI is generating these files when you add when you run the DDN model add command. And the way it sort of does it is each file corresponds to one model. So in practice, what this means is for a Postgres database, each file corresponds to one table in that database.
Yeah, excellent. So I'll go ahead and do a local build, and then we can say we can go ahead and take this Docker command, and hopefully my Docker is behaving better than your Docker right now. And we're going to go ahead and pull some things down, which hopefully should be very, very quick. Excellent. And then let me open up a new terminal. We can pass the local flag to our console here. And of course, because I have 16 windows open, there we go. Now we have our local console up and running. So actually right now what we're seeing, right, is just going to be essentially a local version of what we just built. We can test it, we can iterate because we have watch commands that are running in the background for Docker. If I make any changes to that metadata, we'll see a rebuild happen, right? And then I'll have my API live for me right here.
Yep, perfect.
Sweet. All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
So that was the local API that Rob just showed us how to get set up. And now from there, what I want to do is take this same API and move it into DDN so that I can begin to serve it to other users. So then I'm going to do project init. The project init is going to go ahead and create a project on DDN. It's going to create our subgraphs if required and configure our local repository to work with that project. And then I'm going to do DDN supergraph build create. And this is going to build all our connectors, and then it's going to build the metadata and basically just give us a GraphQL API. Just waiting for this to come up. So here we go. And so this is our API and DDN. So I think if it's one thing that I wanted to convey during this call is that it's never been easier to get going with the Hasura CLI. I think at this level of abstraction, this is probably the simplest set of CLI commands that we can bring it to. Okay, so what happens? So how are we able to do this, right? So in a lot of cases, it just comes down to having better default values of flags. In some cases, for example, the DDN introspect command, this actually puts together a few of the underlying more granular commands. So introspect would actually go ahead and get the schema from the Postgres database itself, and also let the engine know about that updated schema. Another thing we've added is the context. So context is sort of a way to store commonly used flags or sort of configure your environment. Like for example, if I do DDN supergraph build create, now how does it know which project that build is going to get created on? Or what if you want to point the same supergraph build to different environments? Let's say you have a project for staging, a project for production, and you're creating a supergraph build for staging and you want to target it there. And later on, you want to do something in production. Or let's say you have different environment files. So for different environments, staging, production. So you could come into your context file and configure different named environments. The default one is called default. And the way you can think of this is whenever you run some of these commands, it would pick up the values of these flags from the context. So if you run a supergraph build create, it would pick up the values of the project and the supergraph.yaml is building from the context file. Federation is also very simple to get going with. So these are the same set of commands that we saw over here, except when you scaffold your supergraph, you just specify a different name of the subgraph to get going. And then everything else pretty much works the same way. Quick recap, Team A and Team B are going to scaffold their own repositories, and they can completely test their own subgraph locally. And when they're ready, they can go ahead and a supergraph admin can create a DDN project, create subgraphs on that project, and each team can then independently have work with their subgraphs on the same project and then also create APIs from that. Okay, so back to the primitives. So we said, okay, the primitives are super complex. So why do we even have them? I just want to go back to some of these primitives and sort of speak about how, as a power user, some of these things might be useful to you. So whenever you get into more complex cases, if you have custom infrastructure, custom deployments, or scripting use cases, you will find that because our approach, so one of the advantages of this approach is that we can say to a very high degree of confidence that all of the use cases are accounted for. So this first command, for example, which was replaced with the interactive mode, you can still specify all the flags in the command line, which you might find useful when doing something like scripting, or if you want to, scripting, I suppose. The second connector link command, we sort of hidden away the connector link from our default quick start and our default day-to-day workflows. But if you had a connector that was deployed in your own infrastructure and you just wanted to point your engine to that URL, then this command would come in use. And then, of course, the DDN supergraph build local command. This just is DDN supergraph build local, where we've sort of given a lot of default flags. But let's say you were working on your own repository and you wanted to customize these environment variables. So you wanted to override the environment file for that particular thing. You could either set it in your context, or you could just add the flags over here. Or for example, if you want to create multiple builds that you wanted to test later, you could just create a bunch of builds over here and then test them out one by one. Okay, so I think this represents a milestone in terms of what we wanted the CLI to look like. What's next? We're going to continue polishing up the CLI. There are a bunch of things that we want to continue improving just to get the polish right. In addition, we're very interested in hearing about workflows, especially day two kind of stuff where you're iterating on things. Like where in the workflow do you think that things could be smoother? That you feel the tooling could support you better. Whether you're setting stuff up or iterating, please do let us know, and we will look into that. All right, please do visit Hasura to get started. Quick Startup Docs is a great place to get started. And all right, thanks.